What do you know about strategy? I mean, why do they need a strategy in the first place? And I tend to ask questions in the classroom, so to give you a real feel of how it feels, I'm going to ask you questions today. What is the key reason for having a strategy for a company? Profit is the objective, is not necessarily the reason, unless you're really a damn capitalist, you know, like 100% your blood is capitalist. But it's the objective because you need to make a profit to survive and obviously to satisfy shareholders and so forth and so forth. But some companies have other, let's say, reasons, raison d'être, as we say in French.
You need to be able to know about the future in order to be successful. That would be the big goal. And then
sustainable development. I hear bits and pieces of things I'd like to hear, but not the whole.
Have a solid position in the environment.
Okay, okay, there's a question, you see, I mean, I give you hints. You see, the environment, and I'm not talking about the weather, all right?
They have to be different.
Well, there is a competitive component to strategy. Obviously, there are some competitive elements because you know, obviously, not everybody can be the winner. And that's true in a marketplace. Yes?
To be able to adapt to any future environment?
Right, right. There is an adaptation notion, and I'd like to get on that. Did you get a copy of my slides?
No.
Jeez. All right, so do you know that person? Who's that? Not the actress, not... This is the Red Queen. Look, she looks like a queen, and she has red hair. She's the Red Queen. And there's a story. You know the Red Queen from Alice in Wonderland? Yes? What's the story about the Red Queen and Alice? At one point, Alice wants to escape, right? And as she tries to escape, actually, the Red Queen says something. And she says, now here, you see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. And in fact, in the movie, because in the book it's difficult to see, right? I mean, it's easy to read, but it's difficult to see the scene. But in the movie, you see Alice running and running and running. She stays in the same place. Why is this? Because the environment moves as well, right? And just to keep up in the same position, you need to run very often. And this is very true for companies as well. This is part of the Red Queen hypothesis, is part of the evolutionary theory of things. You know, you need to actually move and adapt and adjust to simply survive in a moving environment. This is true for species. This is true for very, most entities we can think of in the world. So there is a notion of having to move, constantly move, and strategy, part of it is actually to know how to move and try to adapt, right? Very important. What's that? You don't know that story? But yeah, frogs. Thank you very much. You know, you passed the eye test, so that's good.
No, the frogs take too long to realize that the water is that they're cooking before jumping.
You know, there's a very important thing in management which is called storytelling. So that you can bullshit the way you want and it works. So storytelling, yes, you're right, but let's, you know, tell the story. The story is, and I tend to make the stories mine. This is a well-known story. I didn't invent it. But as you know, I like cooking, and one of the things that you like to do when you cook, how many of you are French? How many are British, English? Okay, so there will be a fight, but in France, some people like frog legs, right? And as a certified chef, I always try to improve my recipes, and I've tried to actually cook frog legs the best way I could. And so the first thing I did is typically, I bring water to a boil, and once it's boiling, I take the frog. Obviously, I cut the leg before. No, I don't actually. I take the frog whole, throw it in the water, in the boiling water. And what happens? If you throw a frog alive in a boiling water pan, what happens? It jumps out. It's hurt, right? But it leaves. And if you want to eat the frog legs, then you know, it's too bad, you can't, right? Because the frog leaves. Now, what happens if you take the frog and you put it in the water at, you know, room temperature, and you slowly simmer, bring it to a boil, the water with the frog inside, what happens? That's the part of the story you missed. Yes, it stays up until it's too late, and? Yes, death. Right, and then, obviously, in the plate. So what's the takeaway from that story? If you think about this as strategy here, of being part of strategy is to ensure that the company can actually continue to survive in a moving environment by adjusting and adopting its strategic moves. That's the first takeaway from the first story. What's the second takeaway from the second story?
You have to make a strategy to move on and
That was the first story.
You have to see longer and farther than just the closest.
That could be part of a third story, but not my point with the second one. Okay. The second takeaway from the second story is we typically, us, human, as well as, so individuals as well as corporations, tend to actually realize brutal changes much faster and much more easily than slow and subtle changes in the environment in which we live. When changes is subtle, slow, we don't really realize up until often it's too late. While when you have a brutal change in the environment, then everybody realizes that there's a brutal change. And so one of the challenges in strategy is to be capable of detecting, subtle signals of environmental changes so that, so that you can actually plan a little ahead of others. Very, very important takeaway in terms of strategy. So that being said, I want to move on with what strategy is. And I think this is a good definition. I mean, you can Google strategy definition and end up with more pages than if you Googled something on porn business. But there's a lot of definitions of strategy. This one is one that I like. From Jay Barney, he says, strategy is a pattern of resource allocation that enables firms to maintain or improve their performance. The only thing I would add is in a moving environment, right? So it's about allocating a pattern of resource allocation. So it's not individual allocation of resources, it's a pattern of resource allocation. How do we establish an organization to actually continuously allocate its resources to ensure that it adapts, adjusts to a moving environment in order to survive and hopefully perform better than others? This is really what strategy is all about. And the key is really it's a moving environment.